Good morning, brothers, sisters, and gender norm resistors. It's one of your favorite weirdos, Ollamh. Welcome. And today we're going to be doing a tutorial. So 2 months ago, Production Crate put up on their website, on their YouTube channel, a tutorial on how to kind of destroy and desiccate their Corvette model, make it look like it's worn and been left out in the weather and stuff like that. Now, they did this with Adobe Substance, which looks like a great product, but problem is that it is kind of expensive. It is actually I think it's an extra $20 to $50 per month on top of the Creative Cloud. The Creative Cloud subscription. So that's kind of expensive for something that really a lot of programs can and should and can be able to do. So I spent the past 2 months trying different things, working things out as far as getting a good proximity of that in Blender, and that's kind of what we're going to go over today. So, as the middleman would say, let's kick the tires and light the fires. So here we are in Blender. We've got nothing but a camera for right now because we are actually going to do a lot of in-house stuff. So first things first is we need our Corvette model, which is huge. It comes in absolutely massive. So we want to shrink that down to about there, I think. Maybe move it over. Now, of course, if we take it into this, we see, wow, it is really, really dark because there's no lights. So we're going to come over here to our shader panel, and we're going to go into the world, and we just have background into surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in an environment texture, and we're going to load in an HDRI. Now if we put that in there, boom, we have lights, but we can't see anything. That's not good. So let's come over to the render properties, come down to film, and turn transparent off. Now we can see everything. But it's very, very bright, so let's turn it down to 0.5. Now, if we say we want, let's set our camera here, and come back over to our shader panel, highlight that, hit Control-T, that brings up our mapping and stuff like that. So now we can say, well, we want this actually like around here. And we want you a bit bigger there. We want it kind of between these two pillars. Maybe if that would actually... So kind of squeeze those pillars in maybe a bit there. Bring it down on... Or I guess bring it up on the Z. So now it kind of looks like that is in there properly. We'll set it at a bit of an edge and maybe kind of turn it on the Y, negative on the Y a little bit, just kind of make it sure that it's... And then if we say add in a plane, we're going to scale this plane way the hell up. Now that kind of breaks the immersion a little bit, sure, but if we come back over here and we go to object property on that plane, go down to visibility, and we say, just turn on Shadow Catcher. Now we have it so that that car looks like it is sitting in this warehouse on the ground, casting shadows properly. So that gets our set dressing done fairly well, I think. Now, we need to come back over to our shade editor. We need to go from world to object up at the top. And we need to start fiddling with this car model. So we're going to do it in there's going to be 4 ultimate layers. The first one is going to be primer edge, which for that we actually want to drop in a geometry node here. And the primer should always be like along the edges of the individual pieces, along the curves, along the sharper edges and stuff like that. So we need a bevel. And from there from the bevel we want to take the normal. Now just to show you what we're doing and what each step does, we're going to hit a color ramp into here. We'll say bevel into there. So this is what the bevel does. If we crank up the black and we crank up the white, you see it kind of bevels all of the normals, which is kind of good, but not really what we want. We want just the edges. So what we want to do is we want to do a vector math for that. And we want to take the bevel in the top and the normal in the bottom. And we want to set the radius to 0.025, I think, or something like that. Now see, we want to take cross product. So now if we say back that black off, bump up the white. Now you see, now we're really getting just that just the edges and stuff like that. That is exactly what we want. And we're even getting a little bit of edges along the body and stuff like that, which is perfectly fine. Because having those edges there, I mean, the primer should show a little bit there. But because it's a curved edge, it's not showing as much. So we want those just a hint and everything else to be pretty stark. That looks pretty good, I think. So that's going to be our map. That is going to be our map for what we're going to do next, which is actually add in like scratches and stuff like that for the primer. So what we want to do here is we want to add in a Musgrave texture. Now, of course, we can fiddle around with the samples. The higher the samples, the better, I think. The higher the samples, the tighter in things will be. So now the Musgrave texture needs to go to another color ramp. So we want to say the height into the factor. And just for now, we're going to take the color into the base color, so that you can really see what we're doing. So now we kind of look like we have a little bit of a cow type thing. So let's fiddle with these. Let's increase the scale so that we have a really varied kind of thing. Let's increase the detail so that we're really kind of getting scratches. We're really going to start getting scratches and stuff like that. Now, if we bring down the dimension, if we bring the dimension down all the way, we're going to get, well, now that looks like a lot like scratches. Now, if we take the position in here, you see we're still getting kind of that scratchy look, but it's all uniform. It's uniform across the door here. The door in particular is one so you see how it's streaking this way, but it's just kind of swirling there. If we put in the position there, or plug in the position there, it's all now going in the same position. But obviously you're saying, well, yeah, those look like scratches and stuff like that, and kind of random fades and everything. That's great, but is that really what we want? Well, we can bump in the black to kind of get it a bit more randomized, a bit not as concentrated. So now we need to make sure that we're using this map to drive where these scratches are. And in order to do that, you bring in a mix RGB. So for the mix RGB, we're going to want the color the map to be the top color, the actual texturing to be the bottom color, and boom. So now, well, doesn't really work. We could go one or the other. But because this is a black and white picture, we want it to show up. We want to leave just the white. We want to leave things just where it's white. So if we say darken and come in here, well, now all those white parts that we had for our map from our primer edges are just showing those scratches and stuff like that. Now we could kind of bump up things. We could bring those scratches so that they're a bit more, a bit tighter together. Bring them up so that they're a bit brighter, so that maybe it's more of a, this is the primer's showing through, but it's only, the areas that aren't there are more rare. But I kind of like bringing it up here. Let's bring it into ease so that it's not as stark and definitive between everything. We could also bring this to an ease so it's not as yes or no. It's a bit more easing and stuff like that. So now it's just kind of a little bit around the gas cap, a little bit around the window, a little bit along the tops and the edges and stuff like that. It's a little bit along these edges, but along like the door seam, it's very solid. Same with the edge of the hood, but on the hood itself, on those points on the hood, and on the very front of the car over the grill, they're not as solid. They're not as noticeable. So that's fine. That's great. That is our primer edges. So we're going to bring you guys up here. We're going to bring our geometry point down here. And we're going to lasso all of the stuff that is part of our primer edges. And we're going to hit Shift P to add a frame around it. Now, while hovering over the shade editor, we're going to hit End, open up the property panel. We're going to label this as Primer Edge. And we're going to say, yes, we want the color, but we want this more of an aquamarine. More of an aquamarine, maybe a little bit darker than aquamarine. So there's our primer edges. Fantastic. But we don't have those. But the car's not black. The car's not supposed to be black. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to add in an image texture. And we're going to say open. And we're going to go to our Corvette folder. We're going to go into the maps and we're just going to take the base body color. Now, if I remember right, the base body color is just red. So you don't really need to do this, but I just prefer using whatever map they have. Because if there's any kind of special texturing or special thing done to the paint, you kind of want to maintain that. Especially if you're using a model that has like painted on decals or painted on logos or anything like that. So, all right. Now, we're going to need another mix RGB. And this one is going to go straight up to the front. So now we're going to want this in the bottom. Actually, yes. If I remember right, yes. Now we're going to want to say add. Now this looks fine. This looks just fine. But what if we bump this up to the primer? Okay, so we actually do want we want this up at up at the top. We want that as basically kind of a primer color. And we can actually keep it as a mix, I think. So now we have the primer showing a bit, but not much. And of course we can change the amount that the primer shows by changing this. So if we say there, We're really starting to see some primer coming through there. We may actually want to bring up the whites back in here. So now, see, now we're really starting to see those primer, the primer cuts and the primer popping through. So if we go from mix, what if we do go back to add? What if we say to add? I think I kind of, I'm not really seeing much of a difference. Let's say add to mix. Okay, so the mix is a little bit lighter. It's a little bit lighter. It doesn't show as much. But again, we don't need, it depends on how much you want that. Now, one thing you can do to kind of boost that a little bit is you can actually add in another vector math here and say do it on the length. Replug that in, and now see, now it's really bumping up that primer, those primer edges. It is really bumped those up like massively. So you want to bring those down, back down. But if you want a lot of primer edges, if you want your primer edges to really just really show through, you can. But with that texture, with that kind of spotty, scratchy texture, you don't want that super powerful. You really don't want that super powerful because it's going to really start to look kind of sketchy if you go too high with it. But you just want a little bit, just enough to basically kind of show that, yeah, see, the primer is really starting to show through. Let's see, I want that to be a little bit spottier as far as the actual scratches and stuff. But I do want it to be fairly noticeable. Now, of course, we can affect the radius here. If we increase the radius, it's just going to, yeah, it's going to show up more. So if we go with 0.05, you're seeing, you know, that radius is a bit bigger. That's why I kind of try and stick to something like 0.025 or maybe 0.03 for this. And again, we back the black down a bit, bring the white up a bit. And you have some really good primer showing through. I think that'll work. I think that'll work just fine. So that is one layer of everything. And again, this is, you know, you kind of change things the way you want them. So, all right, primer, done, boom. So next is we are going to want, let's see here. What do we want to do next? I think next we're going to do some paint chips. So we're going to chip the paint on our model. Now you want to make sure that this one, that the one where you're adding in the paint is, the actual color paint is kind of kicked down the line a bit. So all right, with this one, we are going to want to add in a noise texture. Not a white noise. You're going to want to add in noise texture. Yes. So, all right. We've got a noise texture. As always, we're going to want to say, take that to a color ramp. Now, you may be wondering, why do you take the noise texture into a color ramp? Well, we're going to show you. So, all right. If we take the color from the noise texture into the color, see, it's all of these weird, it's like a full-on rainbow of colors. That's why you take things like noise textures and Musgrave textures and stuff like that. You take them into a color ramp. So that instead of this Technicolor dream coat, you have black and white. Now, as far as the settings that I had for this, I think I had a scale of 11, detail of 9.5, 0.63 on the roughness, and there. I want to crunch in the blacks a little bit. But here's where the magic happens, okay? With one simple little math node, we say boom. We say everything where it's greater than. And all of a sudden, boom, now we're starting to get some chips and stuff like that. Now, as you change the greater than node, let's close that off. As you change that threshold, you get more or less. And if you back that off, you're going to get more, you're going to get, if you really want like a lot of paint chips and stuff like that, you can increase the whites. If you want very few, you increase the blacks. If you want a few, but you want them big, whatever you want, it's kind of up to you. Now, here's the question. What if we pop a position in there? So now, you see, now it's more evenly distributed, but not necessarily in a good way. So the roughness is really kind of affecting that. The scale is affecting that. The detail, I mean, we do want the details pretty high because a paint chip isn't going to be just a uniform circle or anything like that. So now, of course, we can play around with the greater than. So what if we do 0.57? What if we pump it up to 0.6? So now we've got some paint chips here, there, and they're kind of scattered around and stuff like that, which is good. That is what we want. We want them generally scattered around. And we can play around with this. If we crank up the scale, that's going to bring in more, and they're going to be smaller. If we say bring it down, they're going to be bigger, but they're going to be fewer. We don't want a whole lot of paint chips. We don't want a whole lot. Maybe a few big ones. Maybe a few small ones. Maybe we want to make them... I don't know. Maybe about there. I think that'll work. So, alright, so now we have kind of, we've chipped the paint in a few spaces. Nothing major, nothing super overly destructive or anything like that, which is fine. That's perfectly fine. But now, this is where we want to put in our first bump map. So the bump map, we want to take this as greater than value into the height, and then we want to take this into the normal. Now, if we take off any color, we should be seeing, if I can get a good light bounce. Okay, we may need to add in a light. We're going to add in a point light. Grab it on the Z, grab it on the Y, kind of bring it in over the hood. So, alright, let me bring you in there. Okay, so there's one. There's one. Alright. grab you, bring you over here. See, it's not really showing anything, which is kind of weird. Because that should be showing a bump. Let's just take you to here. Let's take you back to this. And give it some time to do the shader calculations and stuff like that. Okay, now, see, now we're getting somewhere. So okay. So you can see that. So because of the HDRI, you weren't really able to see a lot of that, but if you come in here, you can see that that paint chip actually is under that just a little bit. Now we can let's see if we bring the height down to 0. If we bring it up, there's only so far it'll go. But those paint chips actually are under that. So if we plug our texture, our full-on texture back in, we say, give it some time to calculate everything else. So now we've got that nice vibrant red. And we've got those paint chips, which is good. So now we want to combine the paint chips with our map. So again, we're going to add in a mix RGB. We're going to say, okay, the greater than goes to product 1. This combined primer 1 goes into color 2. This time we're going to say an add, and we're going to crank it all the way up. Now we say, so let's take a look and see what that is. What does that do? Well, it doesn't show anything of the primers now because we're not actually because we actually have to be in rendered view in order to show the primer. So now it's showing the primer edges, the primer shading and everything, plus those paint chips. So now we come in here and we add that into the factor on this one, so that when we plug that back in, we still have that faded primer color, but now we also have the paint chips, and everything is showing the exact same color underneath. So I am going to go ahead and turn that light off for now. So now, see, we've got that really good. We've got that looking really good. We've got those primer edges. I'm still not really happy with those primer edges. I'm going to go ahead and bump this down. There. I like that better. So yeah, now we have the primer edges. We have the paint chips. We are looking pretty. This thing is very obviously very, very left unattended and just kind of, yeah, this is very obviously been left unattended for a while. So again, we're going to highlight these. We're going to say Shift P. We're going to hit N to open up our tools. We're going to say Paint Chips. We're going to take our color and we're going to make it blue this time. We're just going to, we're slowly working our way around the color wheel. So, all right, we've got our paint chips. We've got our primer. But now we need something else. We need what paint is there if it's been left in any kind of, sun or light or anything like that, you're going to have paint fade. So we need to fade the paint. And that's the next object we're doing. So again, we say we want another noise texture and another color ramp. And again, we want the position into the vector, and we want the factor to go into the factor. And now just so that we can see what we're doing here, we're going to take the color from this color ramp over to the base color. Boom. So that shows us what it is that we are working with. So now we need to fiddle with these things. Now we want this down. We want the scale down quite a ways, because it's not, you don't want it really clustered and a lot of small spots. It's going to be more generalized spots. And for the same reason, we're going to take the detail down, and we're going to take the roughness down. So now you see, now we've kind of got this very generalized stuff, which is, again, what we want. If we bring up the black, well, now we see where the whites, where the paint is going to fade, but it's a little too uniform for my liking. So we're gonna say, put something in the middle here. We're going to say take you there. And again, we're going to want ease. Now, if we bring up the whites, do we have any hot spots? Well, we got a hot spot right there, yeah. So we kind of have a few hot spots there and stuff like that. And again, it's a question of, now, what happens if we put the color in there? So if we put the color in there, we get a different pattern. It's still kind of, I do think that it is still a bit much. We don't want, I don't want the full thing to be faded. I don't like the majority of the paint to be faded. What if we increase the detail a bit? Yeah, increasing the detail looks a bit better. Okay, so one of the things that I forgot, I actually had that at 4D. I actually had this set up to 4D. So this kind of gives us a bit more randomness and stuff like that, and we can use the W to kind of shift things around without really affecting the size and stuff like that. So we can say, hey, boom, now we've got a really good patchiness there and stuff like that. I kind of like that. I like that. So now we're going to take these. I'm going to put these a little bit more forward from the paint chips and stuff. So now we're going to need another mix RGB. We're going to want this one to come into the... No, we want you to come into the bottom. We want this one to come into the top. And we're going to want it to be an add, because we're going to want all the whites added together and none of the blacks to really show. So now we've got the faded on top of everything else. So now if we say take you into the base color there, boom, and we say take you into the factor, now we have paint fades as well. But you can still see kind of the primer is added on top of the paint fades. That is separate from the paint fades. The chips are taken out of the paint fade and stuff like that. And it's not just stark white, it's kind of going from, it's kind of, because it's not 100% white, very, very few places are in that paint fade are 100% white, it's kind of fading to pinkish. That's what we want because the paint is fading, but it still retains a little bit, just a little bit of its original color, but it's kind of fading to the primer underneath. Now, one of the reasons why I'm using this as the factor and not as the color is because, well, what if gray primer, for a proper gray, we can come in here and we can say hex code of that. So now you see we've got this proper kind of gray primer. Everything's down a little bit because we are using an add, but if we go to mix, well, now we've got this. Now the paint on through there is showing really well. And actually, you know what? What happens if we say put you in there? What happens if we put the mixed paint chips and the primer into there? So now, see, we're actually seeing a bit of change in there. So now the primer is actually that primer fade, that primer chipping and fading is actually underneath, is actually showing as underneath the paint as well. I think that's going to add a lot to the finished product, really. So, all right, we are most of the way there. So we're going to lasso these. We're going to say frame them. We're going to say paint fade. We're going to say change the color to kind of a more of a combination, kind of a combination purple. That'll work. Okay. Let's close that panel off. So now we are on to the dirt and the mud. So again, we are going to need our old friend, the noise texture, because that's just going to give us a nice crunchy, a nice crunchiness to it. We are going to want to take it from the position. So boom. But this time we're going to do things a little bit different. So if we say take the color into there. So we have this Technicolor stuff. But we want to separate those. So we want to separate the RGB. We want to say separate the RGB. So now you see we have the red is one, the green is another, the green is another. Now we just want a regular math node. We want a regular math node because we're going to want a logarithm. So the logarithm of the red and the green, and that gives us, see, it gives us very stark spaces in between, where basically where the blue would be, gives us spaces in between, which is good because the dirt isn't going to be clumped up completely. So let's turn the scale down a bit by 3.4, but we want the detail up a lot. We want the detail like maxed out because we want that little, that essentially that crunchiness. And we want the roughness up as well, because that is also going to add in a lot of variations as far as everything. So let's go 8.5. So all right. So now we're going to add in something a little bit different. So we're going to add in a divide. Now you maybe say, well, what is the divide going to do? Well, the divide is going to make it so that it gets so that we can affect how much things show. So if we start with, let's start with 1.4. That's good. All right, so now we're going to need another color ramp. And this time, we're going to fiddle around with these handles a lot. So we're going to say U, and we're going to say 0.05. The saturation was 0.7, I think. 0.025. So now we have a really muddy brown. Great! Fantastic, wonderful. If we crunch it up, we get more muddy brown. If we leave it down, we won't get as much. Now we're going to add in a secondary one. We're going to say saturation of 0.7, but this one's going to be 0.05. So it's kind of like it's 0.25 up from that. And now we're going to say between these two, we're going to add in another one that again is 0.7 in saturation, but it's 0.075. So this one is the lighter mud. Now you can see where we're getting that difference, that color variation. And if we increase that, we get more mud. If we decrease it, we get less mud. So I'm going to say 1.15 maybe. I mean, that's still a lot of mud. That is still a lot of mud. So let's crunch up that white. Let's crunch these together a bit so that we have some mud caked on it, but not like it's not a massive amount of mud. So, all right, now we're going to need to do something a little bit different here. We are going to need to also add in another color ramp here, but we're going to leave it black and white because we're going to take this, we're going to add in another bump after that, so that the normal coming out of this first bump is going to come into the second, and now we're going to say plug this black and white into the height. Now, if we crank up the whites, we're kind of bringing in that black and white. You know what? Let's change these to E's. Let's change these to E's so it's not stark difference. But okay, so if we remove that, so now you kind of see where the mud is. But it kind of looks like the mud is set in, which we don't want. So if we say invert that, now the mud really looks like it is standing up on top of all of that, which is what we want. So now we try and find one where there was a paint chip as well. Well, let's plug this in. So now you see the paint chips and everything still look like they're kind of going on the inside, but the mud is going to be on the other side. Great. Fantastic. Okay, so now we are good to go. As far as combining this with our paint and everything like that. So we're going to need yet another Mix RGB, but this one's going to go after. This one is going to go after our paint. And it's going, so we're going to need the color into the color 1, and then we're going to want the factor from our black and white. So now, boom, we have that mud that's caked on top is on top of our paint fades. It's on top of our paint chips. It's on top of our primer showing. So that is everything. Now again, the benefit of, just to really showcase the benefit of using the position from your geometry tree here, if we take this off, you see how it's streaking and how this streak of mud just stops where the door is rather than continuing. That doesn't do us any good. That does us no good whatsoever. So this is just kind of like, yeah, the dirt is just caked on top and stuff like that. So we've pretty much got everything except for a couple little issues. Because this thing is not reflecting any light. This thing is not reflecting any of the lights, any of the environment lights. It's not reflecting anything. So we're going to want to add in an image texture. And in the image texture, now you can do this one of two ways. You can say image texture, you can go on into that, into the model, the maps for the model, and say, hey, you know what, we have a specular map, and drop that onto it. Or you can change the specular number yourself. For this model, oh right, the roughness is also all the way up. So if we bring the roughness down, we say, there we go. Now we're seeing the shininess and stuff like that. But the problem is that the shininess is just as shiny on the original paint as the faded paint, and the mud is kind of reflecting, as are the paint chips. You know, everything is just reflective. So this is where we want to do a combination. So we say, okay, back the one right before our actual paint comes in, we want to add in a mix RGB. We want this one there. We want our mud there. We want to say, sorry, I can barely see what it is, and you guys are probably like, oh, what's he doing? So we want that to be an add, 100%. So we want to say, let's take a look at it here. So yeah, the paint chips. So everything is like, the paint chips are white, the fades are white. So see, it's not really adding anything, but it's the problem is that the color map for our mud is backwards. We actually want the mud to be white. So we can do that by saying an invert. Boom. Now you see the paint, where the paint fades are, you see where the paint chips are, you see where the primer is, and you see where the mud is, all there. So, why did we do that? Well, it's because when we add in this, we're going to add it, go back to our color map, go back to our diffuse map. Now we're going to plug this into our roughness. So now, if we take a look at things, we see, yes, where the car is red is very, very reflective of the light, but the mud reflects nothing, and as we get into the faded paint, it's not reflecting as much light. It's more of a matte finish. And the brighter that gets, the more of a matte, the less light it's going to reflect. So if we bring in our light here, we say, okay, let's grab you on the Z, grab you on the X, and let's bump you up. So there we go. So now, if we say, come over here, we can see that light is being really, really brightly reflected in... Right, let's grab you. No, not you. You, yes. Okay, so you see how tightly it's reflecting the light on when it's red. And then you get to the mud and it's reflecting nothing. You get to the paint chip, it's reflecting nothing. You get to the fade, it's reflecting some light, but you're not able to see the globe. That's why you use that's why we had everything separated and joined together in different factors. So just with that, just with the natural stuff. Now a Corvette generally is not metallic. So if we say add in a mix RGB, we're going to say U on a black. So now, see, we still have that unique fadedness, that unique fade to everything there. That's fine. But if we say bring you up a bit, well, now as we brighten this undercoat, basically, it's actually, we can affect how shiny that fiberglass is. And that's the problem with a model like this, is it is fiberglass. Fiberglass isn't necessarily going to reflect a perfect globe. That is the finished model. So we have the paint fades, we have the paint fades, we have the paint chips, just to make sure that everything is crystal clear and done for any future reference. We are going to group that. We're going to say mud, and we're going to make you a more brighter purple. And like I said, with things like this, if we want to say, let's say we want the mud. We want to affect the mud. So we can say, well, okay, this is going to start off at a 0. Well, obviously not a 0. So it looks like 0.08 is where it, or 0.8. Okay, so 0.5. Let's say we want to say, now we're going to say, we're going to make a keyframe there. And we're going to say 60 frames ahead, we're going to want it at 1.5. So we're going to want it really covered in mud. And we say make a keyframe there. Now, as we go through our timeline, that mud collects, and it really seems to pile on to where it's already collected until, wow, we have a really muddy thing. Now, if we say here are the keyframes, 1.15, I think is where we had it. And with the... And here's, and maybe you want to do that. Maybe you want to do that. Maybe you want to say, you know, with the paint chips and stuff like that, if you have the black up past a certain point, you're, you know, past, well, if you have the black up past a certain point, now it's going to say, okay, the paint's starting to chip there. You see where the paints are starting to chip. And then you can say, yeah, now it's just the paint chips are really, the paint is really starting to chip. It's starting to wear away, stuff like that. It all depends on what it is that you want. What is it that you want as far as how your model looks? How desiccated do you want it? How grungy do you want it? And of course, the mandatory one is, now we are going to say, so we take a screenshot here and just let it render out. And boom, we have a faded, chipped. You can see the primer edges. You can see where the edges are starting to show the primer. You can see where that fade is, where the paint is chipped. You can see where the mud is. It really looks like a Corvette that has seen better days. So that is how you can take a model, and this will work, and because it's procedural, it will work with pretty much any model. You're just using the normals of the actual model itself, or you're using a generalized just position on that model to say, hey, this is where we're going to add mud. Now with the mud, if you want to really crank things up a bit more and put more of a orangish color to it, you can add rust to a metal container. You can add rust to a lot of different things. You can add if you change, there are some, you can change some of the factors for the paint chips so that instead of just on the surface, it's actually digging into and taking scoops and roughened scoops out of like concrete or ceramic or something like that. There's a lot of different possibilities for this, but I just wanted to show something similar to what Production Crate did, but without having to pay for without having to pay Adobe an extra $20 to $50 a month. You don't need to. You can do it with free software natively and procedurally. So yes, like I said, like I showed you, you can actually program it so that, or keyframe it so that it, the paint starts fading over time and the fades get bigger and more white and the paint just really, really fades. The paint starts chipping here and there, and all of a sudden those small chips just grow and grow over time, or mud starts collecting and just caking and just really just collect, more mud collects on that area and it just, grows. If you use green instead of brown, and maybe a few more textures or something like that, you could actually have like moss growing on your Corvette. You can do that on buildings. I've done that on buildings as far as, just making moss grow on certain parts of a building and stuff like that. And you can do a lot of things with free programs. You just have to do a little bit of research, do a little bit of testing, and you can make something really awesome. As always, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to press the subscribe button. If you liked the video, make sure to leave me a like. If you have found something that was particularly interesting and stuff like that, why not leave a comment? Also, if you do something like this, whether with this model or with a completely different model, I would love to see what it is. So in the description down below, you can actually find a link to my Twitter account. Please hit me up there, link me, tag me in the post there. That's also where I make more notifications better than YouTube does, as far as when we go live or when we do a new video or anything like that. All of this so that you can stay tuned for more from Ollamh Productions. Cheerio!